When did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
Hey everybody, welcome back to House of Asher. I am your host, Steve Asher, and grew up in kind of a cool time, I think. I grew up through the early 70s and into the 80s, which for me, I guess I'm biased, had some of the greatest films and some of the best of the worst, ones that were kind of stinkers, but you loved them anyway because, it reminds you of moments in your life and whatnot. And I know a lot of people who grew up on that type of filmmaking and that type of work, and went on to be directors themselves and do things like that, or at least always had a enduring love for that genre. And the films I'm talking about mainly are the types that you might catch at the drive-ins, or kind of like the old Grindhouse stuffs and the old kind of budget horror flicks and action flicks, and even stuff like Duel. And stuff like that. It just stuck with me, man. I mean, that's why I've got posters of Trilogy of Terror right here. That's why I have, Kolchak the Night Stalker. That's why I have, just different little things from that time, because it meant a whole lot to me. And some people go on to have their own little channels and do their own, their own little spin on it and actually play these. And the gentleman I'm going to have on today is such a man. He is quite the man. And let me go ahead and invite that man on. Terrible Tim, are you there?
I am here, brother. How are you, Steve?
Man, rock solid.
You're on the House of Asher.
Yeah, doing good, man. Rock solid, about froze to death, but other than that, I'm good.
I tell you what, it's the same here, man. It's cold as can be here in Kansas City, so we just had about an inch of snow the night before last, so it's pretty brutal out there.
Well, what we're getting right now is just that little pellet sleet stuff, and it's totally manageable. But, we had like a real hard storm here in Western Kentucky in '09, and it was pretty gnarly. We bugged out of our house for a while, and because me and my wife have special needs children and stuff, so when power goes off, there's no oxygen, so it's time to boogie. And so we're like gun shy. It's like people in Europe after World War II or something. They're sitting there flinching anytime they hear something, because they're so, they're like, well, I don't know that storm, man. But I'm sure you guys have that all the time up that way.
Yeah, we've had our mix of bad weather up here, that's for sure. And I have a feeling it's going to be a brutal winter for everybody this year. It started early, and I have a feeling it's going to be a long one.
One of my favorite things, and I guess this isn't technically what we considered a Grindhouse or a drive-in movie. It probably would have been killer to see it. I think it would have been great to see it in the middle of winter, was 30 Days of Night. And I really dig 30 Days of Night, even though it's more of a modern, vampire flick. But I just love it when we do get winter, it'd be at, Thanksgiving or Christmas. I always invite people. It's like, hey, who wants to go down by the courthouse dressed in some ratty-looking clothes and be making that, kind of scream. I'm sure I just pegged the board when I did that, but but I don't know. Yeah, I'm weird like that, man. So let's talk about your channel, man. Tell everybody about your channel.
Well, the TV show that I host is called Drive-In Movie Maniacs, and the character I play is called Terrible Tim, of course. And we are nationally syndicated on retro television in just about, I think, 150 cities in nearly 147 states. And that started here at the end of September, and we've been doing really well. We just got our contract extended on Retro TV. They like us so much, they're going to keep us around for a while. So we're really thrilled about that.
Man, it's groovy. And, there needs to be more of it. You definitely need to see, stuff back like that, because as much as I like new films, and I don't want to sound like the old guy shaking his fist at the, CGI machine and all that, but there's a certain charm in those films. Well, you know what I'm saying?
My fist at it.
I'm keeping my hands in my pockets. It's freaking cold. But no, you go right ahead. I mean, I try to give it its due, and when it's used correctly, like you take something like an Avatar, it's done. There's a beauty to it, but a lot of times, like if you take, I was talking to somebody just the other day about like Underworld, which I love Underworld, but when you have those CGI werewolves, man, it's obvious they're CVG werewolves, CVI, whatever. And I don't know. You'd think at this point now it would be extremely seamless. I mean, even the stuff they did like in the Star Wars stuff with Carrie Fisher, and it's like close, but there's something when you blend reality with prosthetics or reality with some sort of other mechanized something, that there's enough of the human or enough of the physicality of the physical creature there that it goes, oh yeah, that looks pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, I could go off on Star Wars, especially what Disney's done to it all day long. I mean, don't get me started on that. But as the TV show goes, as far as Drive-In Movie Maniacs goes, we're influenced by, the old school, like you said, the Grindhouse stuff that was, before the special effects, where they, were on a budget, but yet they did what they could do. Guys like Ted V. Michaels, who, did all those great films back in the 60s and 70s. He did everything on a budget, but it was done so well in a way. Yeah, it's cheesy, but yet he did what he could do with what he had. You know what I mean? And I think that's what makes those movies so good, is the passion that's involved in making something like that. That's what we do as a TV show. We are making a show on a budget, and it is what it is, and we're doing the best we can with it because we're very passionate about it. You know what I mean? And that's what it's about to me, is what your passion is. You can have all the CGI and all the money in the world, but your movie's going to be complete garbage if your heart isn't in it. You know what I mean?
No, I mean totally. I mean, and that's the thing, is that you can generally tell when people are there for the passion of it, even if, like you said, even if it comes out a little cheesy or a little rough around the edges, you're like, that was, warts and all, a great experience, and it's something you'll be talking about the next day. I've seen movies that, like you said, touch a lot, on the kind of Star Wars ethos of it, and especially the modern stuff, and it's sort of like, it's okay. It's a little bit more of an action flick. I mean, I like Star Wars or Star Trek, either one. I don't judge, and I like them for different reasons. But like some of the new Star Trek stuff, I'm just like, so it's just a space action movie now. It's lost some of its heart, and it's like, at least in the 70s, man, we had car chases.
Hey, man, the 70s were awesome. I saw Star Wars, the original, at the drive-in in 77, so that was an experience for myself, and I wish kids could experience that same feeling that I had in the 70s as a child, experiencing Star Wars when it came out, And now, like you say, with the new CGI and them adding Princess Leia at the end of, like, Rogue One or something, to me, that kind of destroys my childhood in a way. I mean, I could go off about Rogue One and what they did with that. I felt they could have done the ending a little bit different. But yeah, I wish I could take kids back and let them experience, what I experienced. Like you say, in the 70s, it was a different time, and you accepted things differently,
Right. I mean, and there's a certain thing of, I don't know. I'm on the fence about this. Some people's like, well, man, there's been so much space-related stuff. There's been so much horror-related stuff. It's kind of old hat. Yeah, but sometimes you'll come along and somebody will bring a new twist to it, and it's like,
that's it. You gotta approach it differently. You've got to do something new to bring it to a modern audience. Yeah, totally.
Right. And I don't know. I mean, I remember when I was small, one of the first films, this is like a really early memory. I was small. I went with my uncle, Uncle Randall, and we went to see, I think it was like House of Wax, or it was like a House of Wax, but it was like it was like, all I remember, there was a scene of a bunch of Asian women, and they were dunking them in these vats of wax, and they would lift them up, and then, they were, of course, nude, but, you just saw a boob, right? But anyway, they lifted it up, and they were like, just the expressions on their face, and you're like, crap, and that really stayed with me, man. And, even on television, like you said, you had Kolchak and things like that, but it was sort of like it pushed the envelope, especially like you said, that's when the touch of the Grindhouse come in, and Hills Have Eyes stuff and all that, which it still kind of touched on that earlier, not so much Hammer films, but some of the kind of Edgar Allan Poe-esque qualities of stuff, classic stories, and I don't know, it just always stuck with me. And now I saw Star Wars here at the Capitol Theater, which thank God reopened a handful of years back. It shut down for a minute, which broke my heart. Do you remember the scene? I don't know if you like Stephen King very much, but the made-for-TV movie, not the thing that's out now, but when who was it, man? The comedian guy come through, and he said, "Oh, you shut down the so-and-so, you slimes." That's how I was. It broke my heart because I'd moved back here to Princeton, and I was like, "Oh God, man, no." It bothered me. But now the drive-in shut down some years back. We actually have one in Calvert City, which, as far as I know, is still functional, and it's just one of those little gyms in a vast wasteland. There's not a whole lot of that around here anymore, and like you said, it's unfortunate.
It really is. The whole drive-in experience has, obviously since the 90s, a lot of drive-ins have closed. I believe there was 4 left here in Kansas City up until this year. We had one actually closed down this year. The I-70 drive-in, which had been around since, I believe, the late 60s, early 70s, finally closed down this year, which is kind of sad. To see it go. We still have 3 local ones that are open. We'll see how long they last. But yeah, it's a time gone by. It's there's a good documentary called Going Attractions. It's about the demise of the drive-in theater in America. Well, it's about the rise and then the demise of drive-ins in America by my friend April Wright. It's called Going Attractions, the story of the American drive-in, something to that nature. But it explains, she gets together with Joe Bob Briggs, and they go driving around, checking out old drive-ins. And she just traveled the whole country and interviewed everybody who still has a drive-in that she could get a hold of. And it's just a really neat documentary that she did about, a time gone by, an era that has passed us by, that some of us are trying to revive and keep alive, Well,
you're right, too, and even more than you're saying, the fact that it is more than Americana, not just for, because I'm sure I could be talking like, you remember when we had polio? There's a lot of stuff that's gone, and that's okay, and I'm glad it's gone. But, just look at, I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. It had Richard Dreyfuss in it, and Sybil Shepherd. I'm blanking on it. American something. Graffiti?
Don't know. Oh, American Graffiti, yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of movies from that period and stuff that touched on like you said, the experience of going to the drive-in and meeting friends and this and that and all that kind of stuff. Setting up on your car hood. I remember people used to put the little speaker thing outside the window and sit on their car hood, where they would be kind of outside, get fresh air and all that stuff. And I remember sometimes when they would show movies, and it would show an outside scene, but because our drive-in, it was all open sky, or like if you see anything space related, it looked like it's happening because the whole background behind the screen is nothing but stars, and you just don't get that. I'm sure IMAX is killer and all that, but I don't know. I always try to introduce my kids and turn them on to like early cinema. There was a movie, I'm trying to think, I can't remember if you showed it or not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Beyond the Door. I'm not sure if you showed that yet.
I have not shown Beyond the Door. We will probably show Beyond the Door sometime down the road. I've always wanted to do. It's a great movie. I know a lot of people have shown it, but yeah, it's a great movie.
Well, that was one of the movies, that was one of my fears as a kid. I was always, I was raised in a pretty religious background, the South, it's going to happen. But I was always scared about possession, and I was always, for some reason, I was afraid. I guess you fear like your parents not becoming your parents or something. There's a certain, maybe it's how we deal with mortality, Doctor. I'm not sure. I'll get on my couch now, but I remember that scene where she kind of turns her head around and her eyes are white and her face is all jacked up, and it always stayed with me. It scared the crap out of me. But had you ever showed Gargoyles? Which I know was more of a TV movie, but...
No, not yet. I mean, we got a long way to go. There's so many public domain films out there that you could get to. We've only been running now. We are in the middle of filming our 5th season, so we only have about, I'd say, 35, 40 episodes out there right now.
Well, let me ask you something, since we're touching on public domain. If you grew up in that time, and and people are probably sick to death of hearing me talk about it. I grew up on Cecil Creep. I grew up on The Count of Five out of Nashville. Later on, obviously, people like Elvira are important, and Billy Bob Briggs and Captain USA and all those guys. I've always I always sort of had an inner horror host, and someone said, well, you should do a thing on YouTube. If a person wanted to do something like that, what do they got to do? What's the hoops and stuff if they actually want to host their own show like this?
If you want to be serious about it and not be known as an internet horror host, I would say avoid YouTube at all costs is what I would say.
Gotcha.
It just depends on what you want to do. If you want to be an internet superstar in that way and be an internet horror host, then that's what you want to do. And I'm not going to dog anybody for wanting to do their thing. We started horror hosting. The reason I started this show, Drive-In Movie Maniacs, is because Kansas City hadn't had a horror host in 25 years. We have a rich tradition of horror hosting, just like you do down there where you're from. We had horror hosts from the 50s and 60s all the way up in the 70s and 80s, and then somewhere in the 90s it all went away, and for 25 years we didn't really have a horror host here on TV in Kansas City, and I couldn't figure out why nobody had picked up that torch and brought that back. I knew it was going to have to be brought back in a modern kind of way. If it's going to work in today's world, it's going to have to be something a little different that appeals to a younger generation. The last horror host we had here in Kansas City was a lady by the name of Crematia Mortem, who hosted the Creature feature on Channel 41 here in Kansas City for a good part of the late 80s into the early 90s. And she is a good friend of mine. Her real name is Roberta Solomon, and she passed the horror host torch to me about 4 years ago. So that was right there. Just having her pass the torch to me was a big coup. You know what I mean? We were able to say, hey, we are officially the horror host of Kansas City. I was lucky enough to have connections at some of the public access TV stations here in Kansas City. Before we ever started making the show, I knew people at the TV stations. I used to do some horror events that I used to organize and bring in some celebrities and show their movies and have them sign autographs. And so I did that for a number of years, which really led me to doing the show. But we started doing the show in 2013. I got it on a couple of public access TV stations here locally. My original idea was to get it on in the 3 major counties that we live in the Kansas City area, which would be Johnson County, Wyandotte County, and Jackson County. And so that's kind of how I approached that. I already had the connections at 2 of the college public access stations, and then I made a connection at the other one over in Missouri and got our show on in those 3 counties. When we got on television over here in Wyandotte County, well, their station not only has a cable station, but they were on Google Fiber, which really opened up our footprint to a bigger audience on the Kansas side, because when Google Fiber got put in a couple of years ago, a lot of people got that. So now they're getting our show on Google Fiber over here on the Kansas side. At the same time we did that, we met a guy who owned TV 25, which is a local over-the-air station out of Kansas City, Topeka, and Lawrence, which really opened up our footprint to over 2 million people. So we kind of grew from a local public access show to a local television network host and show. And through that, we got hooked up with the people who own Retro TV, which took us to that national level this year. So if you want to be a horror host, it just depends on what you want to do. It also depends on who you know and how you got to get out there and make connections. You got to be out there networking, meeting people, knowing who you're meeting, remembering who you're meeting and what they do and who they're affiliated with. They might be affiliated with somebody else that might be able to help you down there. You know, it's all about networking, man. You know,
right. Well, exactly.
You can get on YouTube and you can post your stuff on YouTube. You know, but who's watching it? If you're not networking, if you're not promoting yourself, you got to be out there. You got to be out there carnival barking yourself all the time, and I'm not comfortable doing that sometimes because I'm not an egotistical person. I'm not trying to feed my own ego every day or feed my self-esteem. It's very much about a core group of guys that make this show. It's not just about myself. You know, there's a whole crew involved with this show. So, you know, when we originally started, I just got together with my friends and I just knew, oh, this guy does this guy does that. My friend Ken was in film school and he introduced me to some film guys, and it just was born out of necessity through meeting the right people and just getting the core guys that have been with me for 5 years now to dedicate some time to this and believe in what I believe in, my, you know, in my vision. And so far so good. You know, we are actually earning a little bit of money doing this now, so we're pretty happy campers, and the next year looks really good for us.
Yeah, man, it's definitely sound like you've
and
you've
I
really...
will stop talking.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. I enjoy listening to you. I mean, it really seems like you've really bumped it up and took it probably further. I mean, who knows? Maybe you expected to take over the world, but it definitely sounds like you've really jumped up on it. I know, which I'm not sure how much you actually know about my background, being a writer and stuff like that, and also have been in punk bands forever. You have to learn, like you said, you have to be outgoing, even if you don't want to be. You have to be able to talk to people, even if you're uncomfortable with it. I'm not saying you necessarily got to BS your way in there, but you have to kind of push past a lot of those little quirky things that are in the back of your head or whatever, little things that slow you down, those self-destruct things, those inhibitors, which I think a lot of times people that watch these type of films get that. I think a lot of times they live kind of vicariously through some of this stuff. But like what I like about this is that, you know, you've kind of brought your own sort of thing, because I know you got kind of like sort of a German type band thing in there, right? That you do. Am I wrong on that?
Not. We have band. You mean the music on the show?
Yeah.
Or some of the bands we've interviewed. We've done a lot of different things with a lot of different artists. I'm trying to figure out. We have a band that does all the music on the TV show called the Haunted Creepies. They're from Transylvania, and they do all the original music, the theme music, and a lot of the music that you hear on the show. The Haunted Creepies are also the ghouls or the ghosts that haunt the drive-in that Terrible Tim runs, and they're kind of my nemesis, so we're constantly kind of getting in entanglements with the Haunted Creepies. But on the other side of that, we also have a lot of special guests on the show. I've had a lot of musical guests on the show. Ghoul Town, the guys, they're a band out of Texas, have been on the show. They did a song with Elvira about 4 or 5, 6 years ago. My friend Michael Kuza, who tours with Motionless in White a lot, we've had his band on the show. I have had a couple of German bands on the show, a band called Lord of the Lost. They're from Germany. I've had them on the show and interviewed them. I interview a lot of bands, a lot of celebrities. We've been lucky to be at a lot of different conventions or horror cons or whatever, and been able to make friends. You know, like I said, I came into this organizing my own events and bringing celebrities to town. So I already knew a lot of like people in the horror world and in the music world because I used to book bands before I did all this. So it just, all those parts of my life just kind of fell into the show. One of my good best friends is Jason Lively from Night of the Creeps, and he was also in European Vacation with Chevy Chase. He's one of my best friends. James Duval from Donnie Darko. We're all good buddies, and we all party together, and we all do the horror circuits together and have a good time. So we just been really lucky. We got a lot of music. We got a lot of cool faces that come on our show. You know, when you can get celebrities to give you that nod, that's a huge bonus in your corner, because now you're being exposed to their fans, and especially with the internet and things like that, you know, they retweet your tweet or whatever, that's going to blow you up to their fans. You know, last year when we were at Comic-Con, Planet Comic-Con here in Kansas City, Jerry the King Lawler was there, and we got to not only interview the King, but I got to be pretty good friends with Jerry Lawler, just because he's such a huge horror host fan. He's from your neck of the woods, and I know he's
I used to watch
like,
him. Well, I used to watch him wrestle when I was a kid. So, yeah, it's the same guy who took me to the drive-ins, took me to wrestling. So I got a pretty good tutelage from my uncle, or from my brother-in-law, sorry.
Yeah, Jerry's a really nice guy. I couldn't say enough good things about the King, man. He just was so gracious with us. He's a big Ghoulardi fan, because he was kind of, I think, born in Ohio and grew up watching Ghoulardi, and then he, you know, obviously took over television and wrestling down in Tennessee in your neck of the woods. Yeah. But he's a big TV personality. I view him more as a TV person than I do a wrestler, because if you wanted to be on TV, in wrestling in that part of the country in that time, you had to go through the King. He took over television down there, and he is such a professional, but he was so nice to us. When I met him, I was such a big fan of what him and Andy Kaufman did. I said, instead of you and I in the interview talking about Andy Kaufman, why don't you and I get into a fight at the end of the interview, like, you know, Andy Kaufman style, right, and pay tribute to it instead of talking about it. And King's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And he laid the whole thing out. He goes, you asked me this and this and this, and then, you know, you get upset and stand up, and I'll push you around. And it was so cool what he did with this. And you can get on YouTube and watch the whole interview with Jerry the King Lawler and see the whole thing. But it was great that he did that with us, because it gave us such a push. We're already big in the wrestling community because of a friend of ours called the Midnight Rose, who's one of the characters on the show. He's a wrestler. He wears a luchador mask, and he kind of comes in and helps me beat up 100 creepies when I need a little bit of muscle, or he just is kind of my sidekick whenever we go to different places and we get into trouble doing stuff. This year we went to a Slash and Bash film festival with Leslie Easterbrook from Police Academy and the Devil's Rejects, and gosh, I don't know what all Leslie's done. She was on Laverne and Shirley when I was a kid, and I had a huge crush on her. So the fact that she came on our show and did a skit with us, you know, she did a little skit with us this year that'll be on television sometime next year. So anytime you can incorporate something like that and cross-pollinate with people, that's always going to be positive for you in the end, because their fans are going to find out about you, and your fans are going to find out about them if they didn't know about them already. You know what I mean? So
yeah, dude, there's someone I was going to two things I was going to say. I know you've had Tom Savini on. I know you had like Sid Haig, William Forsythe, and all those guys. Have you been following the new like Amityville movie that's going to be out?
I have not.
Yeah, it's going to be a new one, and the reason I'm kind of pitching this to you, Diane Franklin, who had played the older sister in The Possession, and she had also played in, like, good Lord, man, like a bunch of different movies, a bunch of 80s stuff, and just a sweetheart. I had her on the show, and I always told her, I said, the second movie was kind of twisted up because of some of the subject matter. I said, but it was pretty freaking spooky. And so it was just like this, we're just talking and shooting the breeze, and I said, if you ever have something coming up, let me know. And she said, well, actually, I have a thing, the Amityville Murders, which goes back into the old DeFeo family, and she actually plays the mother of the DeFeo, blanking on her name, but the mom DeFeo. And I said, man, I would love to have you on. I mean, I'm just a small show. She's like, oh yeah, absolutely. She did that. She even sent signed stills from the movies, and so yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing in a very small level. I'm kind of feeding my geeky horrorness and all that stuff, and actually touching base with these people, and I've been really lucky to be able to speak like guys like the Count of Five and stuff like that. And so I have to walk that fine line because it's kind of paranormal based. So of course I'm going to ask you questions if you've ever experienced anything, just because it touches on the field of it, or had any UFO encounters. But I think there's something about it. I think people that have an interest in things that are not Lifetime movies, and I'm not dogging Lifetime movies, and it's not dogging Hallmark movies, but that's just not me. It's just like like you see those memes when you're talking to somebody and it's real fine, and within 5 minutes you're telling them information about serial killers you probably shouldn't have told them. That's me. Good for good or for bad, that's me. But and there's something about it, man. There's something. There's a certain kinship. People know each other, and you can talk to somebody in about 2 minutes and go, yeah, okay, yeah, he's about the life. Now I know you said you had a large team of folks coming together. Did you guys all start out? I mean, I know you worked together on this for years, but was this sort of like people in your circle and it just sort of gravitated toward this, or how did you build your team up?
It was kind of a mix of both. Some of the guys that are with me, I've known since I was a teenager, since the 80s. And some of the guys I've only known about, maybe just a good part of the last decade. It just kind of came out of, like I said, my friend Ken and I were hanging out, and I just, found one night I realized that he was going to film school, and I said, man, I'm looking for some guys to help me start making a TV show. I got, the Haunted Creepies all set up to do all the music, and I got this and I got that, and, I got these TV stations ready to show anything that I put together. It was just kind of a matter of figuring out if anybody was interested in it. Ken went to school and talked to a couple of his friends, and that's how I met Josh Reinhard, the director and editor of our show. Josh was going to school with Ken, and Ken brought him to the set on the first day, and Josh showed a little more passion than even Ken did in the long run. And Josh is, Ken kind of parted ways with us in the first year because he wanted to go do something different. We still love Ken and still talk to him, but he just wanted to do something different with his life. And Josh and I just felt like, the first year that we did the show, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were still trying to figure out our way and figure out our formula, figure out exactly how the character worked. And, a lot of our first season to me is test footage. But it's out there in the world for consumption, for better or worse. Josh and I just felt like, the first year we had such a positive response to the show and we're building such a following right off the bat that we felt like, okay, well, we're doing something right. So let's continue and just keep polishing it. We just took a turd and polished it as best we could and just keep on polishing it until, it looked like a diamond, even though it's a turd, But I met my makeup artist, Rod Zirkle, through just doing my events. I had him come out and be a face painter at some of my events, and met him through another makeup artist, and I just asked him if he wanted to do it, and he was in because he grew up on all the same horror hosts that I had grown up on. Midnight Rose, the wrestler guy on the show, his name is Blade Braxton. He's in a lot of trauma films. He's in the new trauma film coming up called Shakespeare's Shitstorm. I hope we can say that on your show. And he's also been in, Return to Nukem High Part 2 or 3 or something. I can't remember which one he was in. So he's done a lot of trauma films. So he brings that trauma world into our world. A lot of those trauma people, like our show, and obviously we're huge trauma fans, Lloyd Kaufman fans. I wouldn't be surprised if you see Lloyd Kaufman on our show in the next few years, or Toxie or Kabuki Man. They may all make an appearance on Drive-In Movie Maniacs at some time or another. But Blade and I met at a convention, and we just became really good buddies, and realized we both grew up watching like shows like The Young Ones, and loving a lot of the same horror movies, and like Humanoids from the Deep, and things like that we just connected on, and so I brought his character in on the show as a guest appearance, and we just had a chemistry together, as him as the Midnight Rose and me as Terrible Tim. We just kind of had this goofy chemistry, so it's just led him to being a reoccurring character on the show. The Haunted Creepies, the guys that do all the music, I've known some of those guys since the 1980s. Another guy named Brian Blair, who does a lot of the monster suits and stuff on the show. He's been a friend of mine since the 80s. Yeah, it's a mix, man. It's a mix of people coming together who are passionate, and the people that, were passionate about it and stuck with me are the people that are still there, and the ones that weren't so passionate are the ones that have dropped off. And, that's too bad. God bless them. We don't hold any grudges against anybody who's not with us anymore. We're still friends with everybody. I think some of them might have wished they'd stuck with us, now that we've had some national success. So, I'm just going to keep doing what we're doing and keep plugging along,
Well, not to totally plagiarize on Bob Seger, but like the old rock and roll never forgets type, ethos. Horror doesn't either, and I knew I always had horror going on, movies and whatnot, stuff like that. But as you are having small kids and do this and that, and you kind of are focused on more immediate stuff like that, and that was the thing. I'm 48 now, so I'm like, my kids for the most part are grown. I'm a granddad newly, so I'm like, I'm gonna get back to some of the stuff I really dig, and some of that's playing music, and some of that's doing this, and some of this stuff is my writing, and some of this is ghost hunting, and some of this I don't want to be pigeonholed, and I think that's probably very true of horror fans all over, that there's always some little thread that connects all of this together, because it so easily can. You can't have a good horror movie without great music and great atmospheric soundtracks. You're not going to have it without freaky characters and strange situations. And it's not always that it's fringe people. I think horror never really got, or be it horror or whatever, some sort of outer fringe type films like that, never really got its due. Even to this day, it's still kind of like the ugly stepsister, but the ones who really love it, like I said, you can go, not just another pretty face, boom, we know what that is, whatever, throw this over here, even if it's something like, good God, like Blue Velvet or something, and that was an effed up flick, but you say something from that, and they're gonna go, they immediately know. It's just like it's hardwired. There may be a day I might maybe remember what my kid's social is, but I'll remember what the scene from blah 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 when this guy got axed or something. There's something in it. It's something genetically different about horror fans and people that, I don't think it's so much generational, because there's kids that's now that's like that, but I think it's different because, like you said, with the advent of YouTube and all these different video formats, it's right there. They didn't have to seek it out. You remember, like, you were like going to Family Video or going to wherever, and it's like, hey, do you have this and that film, or Faces of Death, or do you have whatever? Man, you really had to seek it out and hook it up. It was a labor of love.
Horror movies were like almost like these legendary things that were talked about more than they were seen, because I mean, even in the 70s, you didn't have videotapes and stuff that you could go rent. I mean, you had to go see the movies in the theater, or at the Grindhouse theaters, the little cheap dollar theaters, or the drive-in, or you didn't have home video at one time. So it was even harder when we were kids, if you think, how the hell did we do it? I mean, you had magazines, I guess, and stuff, but you didn't have any internet. You didn't have any of this stuff. It's just crazy to think how much it's all changed.
Right. I mean, you had, you'll hear people talking about like famous monsters of Hollywood and things like that, but it wasn't until, at least in this area. Okay, let me explain. Let me explain how this worked. I live in a little town of Princeton and love the place, but it's different. So when I was a kid, when I was real small, they used to have like girly magazines, and they used to have like different type of magazines that they felt was a little too much, and they would have Fangora magazine and stuff like that, and Creepy and Eerie back with them, because occasionally you'd see like a scantily dressed lady or whatever, or someone disemboweled, and I was weird, and I'm looking back at it and I was like, well, you got sex, then you have violence, and it just sort of come together, I think, on movies, because it had a little bit of both. I'm not saying everyone's like, ooh, sex and violence, let's go do it. But there's something about that. And I think for a lot of people, especially in small little towns that aren't exposed to things like that, when you are exposed to, like, not so much porn, but like horror or something like that, it's almost like taking a kid who loves music to an opera for the first time, or to a really solid concert, and they got to meet the band or crowd surf or whatever. It leaves an indelible mark, or a stain, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to look at it. But it's always there, man. And once it takes hold, you either nurture it, you fight it for the rest of your life, or whatever. You have to come to terms with stuff like that. I think that's just the nature of people. Well, let me ask you. Like you said, you've been a big fan of this since the '80s and all this and that. Is there either something that you haven't been able to present, someone that you haven't had to have on, or if there's maybe like a location or an event that you've wanted to set up, but just for logistics reasons or whatever, you just haven't been able to?
Oh gosh, there's all kinds of people and things I would love to do. That list could go on and on for days.
Okay, short list.
One of the things I've always wanted to do, and this is just because it would be a nice little tribute to my dad, who passed away in 2005, is to throw a pitch out at the Royals game dressed as Terrible Tim. I just think that would be really neat. Me, on a local level, my dad was a huge Kansas City Royals fan. He was also a huge Horror Host fan. So to be able to pay tribute to my dad in that way would mean a lot to me personally. It probably wouldn't mean anything to anybody else, but it would mean a lot to me. My dad, I grew up like you. I'm the same age as you. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and my dad would stay up, and I would go with my dad every other weekend because my parents were divorced, and my dad would take me, and we'd go have dinner or whatever, but we'd always end up, staying up late and watching the late movie. And if there was a good horror movie on Friday Fright Night, well, you can best bet we're going to be watching that. And I would be absolutely terrified and just like hiding behind my dad as we laid in bed watching this. Friday Fright Night was a show here in Kansas City that was on in the early 80s. It didn't really have a horror host. It had a voice over by a man by the name of Hugh Bowen, and they showed this just a picture of this skull sitting in like a room, and they just would show that skull, and he would do a voiceover, but he had the creepiest voice, and he would be like, this is Friday Fright Night, and you're watching The Blob. And just that laugh would just send chills down your spine. But I remember that, and that's a huge part of why I do this, is because it reminds me of my dad. And so if I could throw a pitch out the Royals game, that would be probably the top thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that people don't necessarily think about. Not every not every parent was like, well, hey, let's go pitch the ball, or not. Maybe every parent was, let's go fishing or let's go whatever. Sometimes,
Oh,
just like,
my dad was all those things, but he was also into horror movies too.
well, I just think your dad was super cool. But I mean, what I'm saying though is, it's like, say now maybe dads are to connect more with their kids as doing gaming. Now, like
Yeah.
with my father, he had worked in the prison systems years and years before I ever did. Before I worked as a corrections officer, and sometimes I would hear some really gnarly, crazy stories. And so there was that element there. And of course, he always liked, the 70s John Wayne type, Dirty Harry stuff. So, there was that violent quotient to it. And I don't know, maybe just because I cut my teeth on that, it was an interest. But it was also safe due to the fact that I wasn't there firsthand. Straight up violence I'm not a fan of. Movie violence, because it's kind of a cathartic release, I don't have a problem with. I don't, think it's going to cause you to go out and whatever. I think it's necessary. I think people need to be scared and need to be able to have that outlet. So, but let me ask you real quick too. Give me your web address, so if people want to check your show out, and any other links.
Oh, sure. Yeah, everybody can go to www.driveinmoviemaniacs.com, and of course, there's our Instagram and our Twitter. Most of the action for us really takes place on Facebook, as far as we do a live streaming every Friday. If you can't get retro TV anywhere in the country and you don't live in one of the cities that carries it, you can watch us live on Facebook Fridays, 9 p.m. Central every week. We coincide with what retro TV is showing that week, so you can join in the live chat and hook up with other fans of the show and all kinds of things like that. And then, of course, at the Instagram, it's more, you might have exclusive photos that aren't shared on the Facebook page. So it's always good to follow all of our things. And, yeah, Twitter, there's probably less action on Twitter than anywhere, because we just haven't focused on our Twitter page as much as we have. We are just kind of have launched the Twitter page within the last year. So the more followers we can get on all of them, the better. So,
right. Well, let me ask you something else. We've talked a lot about 70s and 80s heyday of Grindhouse and that type of work, and some of the directors and writers from that time. Let me ask you about today. I mean, is there anyone that's just like, I've got a film recently, or I was at a screening of a local director, and it's really cool, and it's kind of got that old school feel. Is there anybody, or do you think it's even possible to pull that off nowadays?
It is possible. Gosh, I'm trying to think of what I've seen recently that impressed me in any kind of way. I will go ahead and just give a nod to a friend of mine who is a huge, like, Grindhouse kind of a guy who all his movies are kind of made in that genre, or made in that, style, is my friend Todd Sheets. Todd's got a bunch of, he's got a huge library. He's well known in the horror community and in the crappy underground horror movie world. So, Todd's made a ton of films. Some of them are great, some of them aren't so great, but there's some really good movies in there that he's done over the years. And right now I believe he's working on a movie called Clownado, which you can probably assume what that's about.
Might have a clown or a tornado in it.
It might. It might be similar to Sharknado, only with clowns, obviously. I was supposed to be in that movie, and I didn't get a chance because we obviously got nationally syndicated this year, and it just took up all my time, and I just didn't have any time to devote to being on the set of a movie. But I believe that's the movie they are getting ready to wrap up on and get out in the next year. I was in another one of his crappy movies a few years ago called House of Forbidden Secrets, and I think they just put that one out on Blu-ray. You can get another one they just did with Leanna Quigley from Return of the Living Dead. She's in that one. It's called Bone Hill Road. It's a werewolf movie. that they did last year, and I think that's available at Walmart and places like that, actually. So
Yeah.
look for Bone Hill Road.
I know she's sort of the one part of the godhead of the Nightmare Sisters, and her and Michelle Bauer, and I'm blanking on the other lady's name, but there was kind of like this, like 2 or 3 that were sort of worked in tandem with different directors, like Fred Olen Ray and guys like that, and so yeah, I've been following her, good Lord, probably since that movie that you mentioned, and yeah, it's so weird. It's sometimes that people can kind of not to even so much reinvent themselves. It's like people rediscover things, It's just like when a kid comes up and is like, oh, well, hey, have you ever heard of the Beatles? Have you ever heard of whatever? And this and that, maybe Black Flag, or you've heard of blah, blah, blah. And it's so funny to kind of see. It's like, oh, okay, you're at that point now. Okay, here. And then you kind of open up and say, let me walk you down the path, keep you away from some trouble. Here's some stuff. And so, yeah, man, that's killer. Now,
have I heard of Black Flag? I was at a Black Flag show. What are you talking about?
You suck. I got into just on the tail end. I actually come to punk through thrash metal, and I had heard. Me and a friend of mine was at Evansville, Indiana Mall, and we saw an album. It was Peace Sells, Megadeth album, and I got Master of Puppets. First, I didn't like it because I didn't know what I was listening to, and I was like, "Was this a bunch of punks or something? I ain't listening to this crap." Well, started listening to it more, and it was pretty cool. I didn't know what punk was. I wasn't hip. I saw another State of Mind documentary, but I didn't really quite get it. I was too young. And then I started seeing Misfits, and I went, oh, that looks spooky. So I started jamming on Misfits. I was like, oh, that's freaking awesome. And then I kind of said, well, what's this Sam Haines stuff about? Then I fell into that because I'm got a little bit more of a goth vibe sometimes too. And I was like, oh, dude, this is so much darker. And of course then, like you said, Kennedy's, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Circle Jerks, all the greats, Bad Brains. But like you said, again, there's that little element of something that pulls you into that, and I guarantee you can go into a room full of horror fans and throw out a name of a band, or throw out like a location, maybe like where you're talking Return of the Evil Dead, something like that, and that's just different places, like the towns that they happen in and things like that, because we always had the story about, well, some of those movies happened in like parts of Kentucky, and there actually was a warehouse and blah blah blah, and who knows what kind of reality that is. But let me ask you, since we were touching on a little bit of horror stuff, and this is a horror-related show and paranormal-related show, in either getting into this, going to this, had you had any experiences, or maybe had you had some sort of encounter that affected the type of character that you play?
There was nothing that's ever happened to me that influenced the character. There's some things that have happened as we filmed the show. There's some things that have happened that we've done. There's 2 different things we've done. The second season we did House on Haunted Hill, and I had a group of paranormal investigators come to the drive-in and I locked them in the snack bar. It was all 100% real. There was nothing faked. I made sure of that myself because I am a skeptic myself. I locked them in the snack bar. I didn't give them any information. I had done some digging with the owner of the drive-in, and I knew some of the history that had happened over the years. I at the time I was working at said drive-in. I'm not going to mention the name of the drive-in because I don't owe them any publicity. But I worked at the drive-in at that time for the last few years, and I knew a bunch of stuff about the drive-in that I'd learned from the owners. So, but I didn't tell the paranormal investigators anything before they went in, because I wanted to see what they found out on their own. You know what I mean? I wanted to test them.
Right.
And the investigator is a good friend of mine named Rob Garcia. He runs an paranormal group here in Kansas City called Elite Paranormal. And I brought Rob in, and I said, "Lan, let's do this." And he was all excited, and I I locked them all in there, and I went up the hill to the thing, to our garage. At the time, at the drive-in that I worked at, there was a garage that we had up on the hill, and I locked them all in the snack bar down in the middle of the parking lot, and I went up and watched them on the cameras that we had up in the. So I had my eye on them the whole time at what they were doing. Anyways, after their first session, they come out of there, and I'm like, so did you know? And I'm asking, and we filmed it all. It's all in the episode, but it's all 100% legit. Even though I'm in character and I'm being goofy in the episode, there's some really weird stuff going on that at the time I didn't even mention to them because some of it freaked me out so badly. But Rob comes out of there, and I asked him, what have you guys found out so far? Did you get any names or anything like that? And he goes, yeah, we got, he said, Mary and what was the other name? Bob and Cliff. And those were the three names that came out of there. And he could have came out of there and said a million different names, but he came out of there with three names that were associated with that drive-in. Those three names were all people that had worked or had something seriously to do with that drive-in. Bob was the old projectionist who had left the drive-in one night and had a heart attack in his driveway when he had gotten home, and he owed the owners money. Or the owners of the drive-in owed him money, and so there had been this big argument about money at some point. And that was another thing that this Bob spirit kept mentioning, money. And Mary was the old snack bar attendant who used to live in the snack bar. She used to actually have a room in the back of the snack bar. She ran the snack bar and lived in that thing. She was still alive, but somebody was asking for her. And then Cliff was this guy that lived up on the hill that had been part of that drive-in since the 60s. So these were all people's names that were very associated with that drive-in. And then the last session we did that night, I went inside with them and sat through it, and they had one of those what is it, an echo box or something like that would spit out these names or words and stuff, every once in a while.
Yeah, like a ghost box, and it'll pick up certain frequencies, and sometimes it'll supposedly answer questions and stuff posed, yeah.
And and this is going to sound really strange because it's not going to make sense to anybody, but it made total sense to me. But it said blue hair, like blue hair, and I ignored it because, to me, that would only mean something to me. It was a personal thing. And so I ignored it when it said that. And then the lady that was with Elite Paranormal, one of the ladies that was sitting next to me, she goes, did it just say blue hair? And I was like, shit. I was hoping it didn't say that. You know what I mean? And I didn't tell them that blue hair was a name. At the time, I was trying to date this girl who had blue hair. And my friend Jason Lively from Night of the Creeps called her Blue Hair. That was her name. That was her nickname. That's what he called her all the time. He's like, hey, you still talking to Blue Hair? And so in my mind, I'm thinking that. And as I'm thinking, yeah, that's what Jason calls my friend Blair. And as I said that, it goes, Jason. The machine said Jason, as I thought Jason. And I was like, okay, that's fucked up. That thing just said Jason. And I'm thinking to myself, Jason Lively from, European Vacation. He played Rusty. And then the machine said Rusty. I'm like, fuck this. I'm out of here, dude.
Man, Tim.
I was.
Man, I'm sorry. We're flat out of time, man. Can I possibly get you back on here where we can carry out on some more of this and touch a little bit more on this story?
Sure.
All right, man. Listen, I'm going to do my outro real quick to these folks. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Make sure to check out Terrible Tim and go check out the Drive-In Movies Maniacs page and like it and go out and watch you a freaking great scary movie. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy all that sunshine while we have it. But as the sun settles and the nights grow long, make sure to check under your bed, your windows. You never know. There might be a faceless, soulless creep out there. You never know. But you might have fun too. So don't be afraid to be a little scared. Until next time, everybody, take care, and